Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Isaiah talks about it's line upon line, precept on precept, here little, there little. And then Paul says that we are to study to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. In other words, you can't just rip a verse out of the Bible and slap it up against the wall and make a doctrine. It has to fit the whole model. And that's where dispensations come in and understanding where everything fits. It's rightly dividing the word of truth. And then in verse 30, he then makes a conclusion based on what we've already talked about. And this conclusion is a wonderful truth for us Gentiles. Go ahead and read that verse 30.
What shall we say then? That the Gentiles which followed not after righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness which is of faith?
Now see, I want you to reread that, because I want to tell you something. That's what one of the things I had to shake is the reading it with a question. And it says, what shall we say then? Question mark. But then it's making an emphatic statement. So now everybody reread that. I'm glad you read it the way you did, because it's in the tone of a question. But now read it with a question and then turn it around and make it emphatic with a period at the end.
What shall we say then? That the Gentiles which followed not after righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness which is of faith.
There you go. You see, what shall we say then? Considering everything we've learned in this chapter, we should say this. The Gentiles who, we weren't following the law, we weren't following righteousness, and yet we have attained to righteousness, but not of our own. We've attained the righteousness which is of faith, and that righteousness, as we've discussed, is the righteousness of Christ. It is not you being so righteous and holy that God has to let you into heaven. It's not you being so wonderful that He decided, I think I'll take that one. I like that one. They're good. No, there's none good. And that goes for you even after you're saved. You have the sinful nature and you have the nature of Christ. And there's a battle going on daily. You have to die daily or you'll follow that wrong nature. So if you're saying, well, I believe that now I'm saved, I'm now righteous, He's made me righteous, and I am now righteous, and I'm going to heaven because I'm such a good person, you've missed it. Even after being saved, you rely on the righteousness of Christ. It's as though you are clothed with Christ. When God looks at you, thank God He doesn't see you. He sees His Son. He sees the righteousness of Jesus Christ that you're clothed in. Not your own self-righteousness, because the Bible has some pretty bad things to say about our righteousness. Our attempts at righteousness. Dirty, filthy rags. And I'm not going to tell you what you could actually say the literal rendition of that is, just I'm going to keep it nice this morning. But let's go to verse 31 and 33 now. In contrast to what God has said about us, the Gentiles, what's He say about Israel? Verse 31 to 33.
But Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, hath not obtained to the law of righteousness. Wherefore? Because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. For they stumbled at the stumbling stone. As it is written, Behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, and a rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on Him shall not be ashamed.
If you go back and see when Israel first takes upon themselves the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, they did take it on themselves. It wasn't forced on them. And they said, all that you have said we shall do. And both Moses and Joshua said, no, you won't. They told them, you won't do it. You're a stiff-necked people, and you will rebel. And they said, "Oh, we're not going to listen to that. We will do it." And God said, even when He was talking to Moses, I've seen these people. I know what they'll do. And yet they willingly went into this covenant. And through the years, they just didn't get it. From the very beginning, God said, "You can't do it yourself. From the very beginning He told them they couldn't do it. But century after century, all the way up to the time of Jesus Christ, they thought that their own righteousness saved them. And then when Jesus came and said, you must be born again, and they couldn't accept that.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, no one's good. Remember when the one says, good master, he says, why do you call me good? There's none good but God. In other words, don't call me good unless you're willing to call me God. Because no man is good. And Jesus preached this message, and yet Israel couldn't accept it. That He would die for the sins of all Israel and all the world. He would die. And they said, who are you? How can you dying for my sins save me? Couldn't accept it. It was a stone of stumbling. It was a stumbling block. They couldn't get it. And then Paul comes along and says, Jesus paid it all. Jesus has paid the full price. You can't be saved by those temple sacrifices. I believe that Paul wrote Hebrews, by the way. And in Hebrews, he constantly says it's not by the blood of animals. It's not by your own righteousness. It's not by the keeping of the law. It's by the blood of the spotless Lamb of God. And we have an high priest, not the priesthood of the Levites, but we have the priesthood of Melchizedek. And our high priest is Jesus Christ. And He offered Himself as a sacrifice. And it's only through Christ and His sacrifice. And what's the problem there? Verse 32. They sought it not by faith. They sought it by the law. And that is what's in contrast to all other religion. Not just the Roman Catholic Church, not just the what we would call the apostate Protestant churches, and not the apostate Baptist churches and all these groups that have gone into apostasy, but the apostate world who threw off their original faith. And you go into the Buddhist areas and the Hindu areas, they once, if you trace their ancestry back, they go back to Noah. They once knew the truth. And at some point along the line, they threw it off. And every one of them are trying to follow some law and be right with God. If you go read the Vedas that the Hindus put out, and go read the Quran that the Muslims follow, and go read whatever holy book, as the world likes to call them, they're not holy. They're unholy because they lead you to a false conclusion. And if it's holy, it's not going to lead you to a false conclusion. And their false conclusion is that you can work your way into a state of righteousness. Arthur was sharing, he was witnessing to a Muslim. And what's wrong with their message? Well, they believe that they can work and stand before Allah and say, look how good I was. And I've shared this before, but when I witnessed to Muslim people, and I witnessed to one at work one day that was taking blood, and I said, when you stand before Allah, just for the sake of argument, let's say he's going to stand before Allah. You stand before Allah, what are you going to tell Him as far as your sin is concerned? What do you show as payment for your sin? Because your works can't pay for your sin. You've sinned against an infinite God. You better offer an infinite payment, or your payment is, it's like going and writing a $10 check when your credit card bill is $1,000. They're not going to be happy with that. It's like you standing before a judge who's getting ready to condemn you to prison time because you, let's say you burn your house down to collect the insurance. And you say, well, wait a minute, Judge. This is the first thing I've ever done wrong. I've been good up to this point. I've never been in court. I have no criminal record. A human judge these days might be lenient on you, but that's not going to take away the arson charge. And that's what anyone who is trying to work their way to heaven, they're going to stand before God empty-handed. They have to show a payment for their sin, and the Muslim doesn't have it. The Buddhist doesn't have it. Be sure to visit our website at kjvbiblebelievers.com, where you can find the latest video messages posted on the front page and links to free downloads of our messages in MP3 format. That's kjvbiblebelievers.com. This program is brought to you by Bible Believers Fellowship. Thank you for listening.